With UFC 311 having two title fights this weekend, I wanted to go through and talk about some of the toughest matchups for every single UFC champion. So I'm going to be going through the three contenders that I think would give the champs the toughest fights. I'm going to be choosing between either fighters in their weight class or fighters below. So if I think someone could move up, give someone some problems, they will also be included in this video. Would love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you have some different opinions, drop them down below. But starting off here at heavyweight, we have Jon Jones, who is the current champ, Tom Aspinall, obviously the interim. We're going to be focusing on Jon Jones here. And in my opinion, the toughest matchup, it's a no-brainer. It's Tom Aspinall. This is a fight I badly want to see. I think Tom Aspinall definitely poses the biggest threat to be Jon Jones. First true loss here. He has insane power. He's an absolute finisher. 8 UFC wins, 8 finishes, 7 of those in the first round. And he's also shown a little bit in the grappling realm where he had a really nice takedown against Volkov, a unique submission, something you don't really see in the heavyweight weight class. Now, he hasn't been super tested in terms of his grappling defense, but it's just because he's getting guys out of there so quickly. He fought Curtis Blaydes, obviously twice. The first one blew out his knee in 15 seconds. The second one, Curtis had no ability to get his wrestling going because Tom Aspinall just finishes dudes so unbelievably quickly. So we don't really know how he is defensively, but I mean, this is 100% the toughest test for Jon Jones. So Tom Aspinall here at number 1. Now, number 2, I'm actually going to be going down to light heavyweight, and I'm going to say the second toughest matchup is Magomed Ankalaev. I still kind of feel like this current version of Jon Jones is fairly untested. Where you look at the end of his 205 run, he had some very questionable close performances against Thiago Santos, Dominic Reyes. The Thiago Santos fight, very close, and that was Santos having both his knees blown out. I personally thought Dominic Reyes won 3-2 pretty clearly in the fight against Jon Jones. Then he has this long layoff, comes up to heavyweight, has 2 very dominant performances. We look at the quality competition, Ciryl Gane, someone who has very little wrestling defense, and then Stipe, who obviously has had an amazing career, but if you look at that version of Stipe versus Stipe 5-6 years ago, they are 2 completely different fighters. That was a extremely washed version of Stipe Miocic. So you look at Magomed, he's not really amazing at anything, but he's well-rounded. He's a technical striker. He hits hard, and I think he has competent wrestling. And so this really would just be a test of what is Jon Jones' current form? If this is a new prime of Jon Jones at heavyweight, then he would obviously just cook Magomed Ankalaev. But Ankalaev's a big dude. I don't think Jon Jones would be the way larger guy. And so Magomed, just being super well-rounded, if he's not going to get taken down by Jon Jones, if he's not going to stand there like a punching bag, I think he could, potentially be an interesting matchup. I think some people are not going to like that Alex Pereira's not here. I just think the difference in grappling is so extreme that I think Jon Jones would just insta-shoot on Pereira, and unless he caught him with a flying knee or an uppercut or something on the way in, I think Jon Jones would just finish it in the first round. You look at his first 2 fights at heavyweight, I don't really see how it goes any differently with Alex. And then my third toughest matchup is going to be Curtis Blaydes. He's probably the most proven active heavyweight wrestler, not including Jon Jones here. He hits hard on the feet, and I guess this would just be a situation where it's can Curtis Blaydes nullify the wrestling of Jon Jones? We saw him do it against Jailton Almeida. So if Curtis Blaydes could do that against Almeida, if he did it against Jon Jones, how would Jon Jones look if he was forced to stand up the entire time with a legit heavyweight who hits hard? I would not favor Curtis Blaydes in this matchup, but would just bring, I guess, an interesting challenge here for the current champion. Now, moving down to light heavyweight, we have Alex Pereira. I think the toughest test is Khamzat Chimaev. Even though he is in a lower weight class and started off 2 divisions down in welterweight, I do think everyone knows that a dominant grappler is going to be the kryptonite for Pereira. Even though he's made improvements, he hasn't looked completely terrible on the ground. Khamzat's kind of just a different level here. I think even moving up, he has a lot of success. When you look at Pereira's ground game, he can get taken down. He kind of just lays there where he doesn't want to make any crucial mistakes, doesn't want to, give up a tough position where he's going to get ground and pounded or submitted. I think Khamzat Chimaev is just going to force the issue here. He shoots pretty much instantly in every single fight. So unless Pereira catches him, I do think Khamzat would have a lot of success in that matchup. Number 2, the guy I want to see him fight next, Magomed Ankalaev. Like I talked about with Jon Jones, he's technical. He's a pretty safe, conservative striker. Also has the ability to wrestle. Is he going to push that against Pereira? Hopefully we'll get to see, but I do think Magomed is a decently tough matchup. And then number 3, this might be kind of shocking because this dude's not even ranked at 185, and obviously this is up at 205. I'm going to go with Bo Nickel, kind of similar to the Hamzat situation. I think the wrestling is obviously going to be Alex Pereira's kryptonite. And so even though Bo Nickel is unproven, if he just went in with the game plan of, I'm going to shoot on this dude right away, I think he could have some success here. Obviously, Bo Nickel, if he can get to his spots, wrestling Alex Pereira, he's going to have success. And when you look at light heavyweight, there's just not a lot of capable grapplers that I think could really give Pereira problems. It's a lot of just like strikers with maybe iffy grappling, so like guys that aren't really going to be able to force the issue. I think Bo Nickel, even though, like I said, he's very unproven, could potentially have some success. Also, maybe an honorable mention like a Caio Borralho. I guess a more proven guy at middleweight with solid grappling. But I just think the wrestling of Bo, if he can get him down and just went out with like a relentless wrestling style, could potentially give Alex some issues. Now, moving down to middleweight, we have Dricus Du Plessis. My number one is going to be the same as it was for Alex Pereira. It's Khamzat Chimaev. I think he's pretty much a nightmare for every single middleweight. You look at what he did against Robert Whittaker, just, completely ran through him, submitted him in the first round. I think he does a pretty similar thing to DDP, Strickland, whoever has that belt. Khamzat Chimaev, the toughest test. Number two, I have Caio Borralho. I think he's setting himself up here to be a future title contender, maybe even a future champion in this weight class. 7-0 in the UFC. He is a great control grappler, showcased the striking against Paul Craig, which, most people can do. Also against Jared Cannonier, hurt him on the feet. So I think he's kind of interesting here, rising up the rankings, someone who I do think could give DDP some issues. And the number three is Sean Strickland. The first fight was very competitive. Strickland's hard to hit clean. He has good cardio, kind of a unique style, not a super easy puzzle to solve. I do think even though the first fight was very close, I think DDP is going to look better in the second matchup. I also just think finishing upside-wise, like DDP just has way more than Strickland, but I do think he's like a top three tough test when it comes to Dricus Du Plessis. Also, we've seen it, and it was a pretty tough matchup. Then down at welterweight, we have Belal Muhammad, and my number one, toughest matchup is going to be Islam. So even down at 155, I think Islam Makhachev beats everyone at 155, and I think he beats everyone at 170. I think you look at their skill sets, him versus Belal, I think Islam is better pretty much everywhere. Like maybe you prefer like Belal's pressure boxing, but I still think just pure striking, Islam's the better dude here. Also, Islam seems very willing to fight Belal, whereas Belal has talked about, we're training partners, we were teammates, don't really want to fight Islam. Now, that could just be Belal being respectful and, Islam wants to get that double champ status. But the fact that Islam does seem willing to fight him, even though they have trained together, it leads me to believe that he thinks he has a pretty decent shot in this matchup. So Islam, in my opinion, would be the toughest test. I think the second toughest challenge would be Shavkat Rakhmonov, probably the fight that we are going to get next. He looked very human against Ian Gary. Before that, he just looked like the Terminator, was running through everyone. Even if he took damage in the Jeff Neal fight, he still got the finish. That was the first time he went to decision against Ian Gary, but he is still very well-rounded. He has a lot of finishing upside. And I think the big question is just going to be like, can Belal actually hold Shavkat down? Because I think it's tough to see Shavkat getting outclassed on the feet by Belal. Ian Gary is a completely different animal when it comes to the striking. They're two different styles. Also just like two different body frames, which Shavkat pretty big for the weight class, tall, lean. Belal a little bit like shorter, stockier. Ian Gary also has a ton of length. So just very different. I still think Shavkat is a legit threat to take that belt. And the number three, I went with Ian Gary. I think even though he lost to Shavkat, he, made a good account for himself. He had very impressive takedown defense, which I think was very interesting, especially in a potential matchup against Belal. I think he manages range super well, and he's just going to be a tough guy to beat here, even for Belal. He'd probably be the favorite, but I do think Ian Gary could pose some problems. You could have filled in, a JDM, maybe like Leon in a rematch, Kamaru Usman. I don't know. I feel like Usman kind of over the hill at this point. JDM, we'll see how he does against Leon. I think Ian Gary, fair spot here at number three. Now down to lightweight, we have Islam Makhachev. And once again, I'm going to be going with the number one challenge as someone not in the weight class. I think it's Ilia Topuria. I think he's the clear toughest test here. He has looked unbeatable down at 145. He's extremely well-rounded. We saw Volkanovski come up from 145 and have success in the first Islam fight. I feel like people are like completely writing off Ilia having any shot in this matchup, and I don't really get it because we had already seen that Volk fight. You look at what Ilia did to Volk down at 145. Now, obviously that was after the loss to Islam. It was after the KO loss. in the second fight, but like we've seen Islam struggle with someone coming up. And I think the difference is that with Ilia, he doesn't have to fight the perfect fight to beat Islam Makhachev. You look at Volk, doesn't have a ton of finishing upside, especially up at 155. So for him to beat Islam, he has to fight like 3 rounds pretty much perfectly to get the nod. He was close, didn't end up happening. For Ilia Topuria, he has that fight-ending power and also just the ability to hurt him even if he doesn't get the finish, right? Where he doesn't have to be completely flawless to get the win. He could find the finish. He could win a round or two on big moments, dropping, hurting Islam Makhachev. I want to see this fight so badly. I don't know if we're going to get it, but I think that would be a super fun matchup. Then number 2, I have Charles Oliveira. Now, the first fight definitely was not super competitive, but Charles is still going to be super dangerous. I think Oliveira almost respected Islam a little bit too much in their first matchup. You compare how he fought Islam versus how he went at Chandler, Poirier, Gaethje. Like with those dudes, he showed them no respect, was putting a pace on them. Now, obviously, that just speaks to how good Islam is, the respect that Oliveira had for him. But I do think if Charles goes out there, fights aggressive, he'd probably still lose to Islam, but if he's going out there being aggressive, like he has the ability to finish anyone in the weight class. And then number 3, the guy that Islam is fighting, UFC 311, Arman Tsarukyan. Arman is really good. I just struggle to see like a clear path to victory for him. It's like Arman's really good, but so is Islam, and he's probably better pretty much everywhere. Arman also doesn't have a ton of finishing upside, and it's just tough to see someone going out and actually winning 3 out of 5 rounds against Islam if you are not finding the finish. Dropping down to 145, obviously we have Ilia as the champion, and I will just say right out of the gate, I think it's very, very tough for me to see Ilia losing at 145, so even if these guys might be the toughest matchups, I don't think they fare super well. But we're going to start off at number 1 with Movsar Evloev. I know it gets talked about, and I even mentioned it in this video, how, Ilia is super well-rounded. He has the striking, but he also has the grappling. I will say, though, I don't think the grappling has been fully tested. Like, you look at the top wins he's had, right? Volk, Max Holloway, those are amazing wins, but those are not guys that are going to test him on the ground. The best grappler he's faced, and someone who's legitimately good, is Bryce Mitchell. And in that fight, Bryce landed a takedown. He racked up 1.5 minutes of control time. So, that's nothing insane, right? You get taken down, held down for under 2 minutes. That's not crazy. But you look at Movsar, has legit grappling. He has, very strong cardio. He looked good in the Aljo fight, landed 5 takedowns on Arnold Allen. If there is somewhat of a weakness there for Ilia, I'm not saying there is, but if it's somewhat untested, if there is somewhat of a weakness there, Movsar Evloev, I think, could be the guy to kind of expose that. Number 2, I have Diego Lopez. I don't really know if Lopez is better anywhere compared to Ilia. Maybe his jiu-jitsu game, his submission game is better. I just think Lopez has a ton of finishing upside where he hits like an absolute tank. I think it's very tough for someone to beat Ilia over 5 rounds, which would obviously be the tough thing for Movsar, someone who hasn't been a finisher. Are you going to win 3 rounds against this dude without getting nuked? It's tough. For Lopez, you're just hoping he's going to go out there, sling it early on, has the ability to end fights, also could catch him in a submission. You're just kind of hoping for a round 1, round 2 knockout or sub. And then number 3, I went with Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski is great. I just think Ilia is such a tough matchup for him. Volk does not have the same finishing upside, and you have to fight pretty much perfectly to win 3 out of 5 rounds without getting put out. He wasn't able to do it the first time. I don't see how a less now durable version of him is going to get it done. But if anyone could go out there and win 3 out of 5, Volk would probably be your best bet. Now moving down to bantamweight, we have Merab Dvalishvili, and I think his toughest matchup is the guy he's fighting this weekend. And I think it's the clear toughest matchup. It's Umar Nurmagomedov. He's so well-rounded. What happens if Merab cannot consistently get his takedowns going? And everyone likes to talk about Umar, he didn't face the top competition before getting the title shot. It was the same thing people said about Islam Makhachev. Sometimes, even if these guys maybe didn't earn the title shots, they are legit good. They are going to put on good performances. I just think Umar's kind of on a different level here. Now, my second toughest matchup is going to be Deiveson Figueiredo. I think he's kind of an interesting fight here for Merab and kind of dangerous because he hits hard. He has a good submission game, nasty guillotine. We saw him sub Alex Perez and Tim Elliott down at flyweight. I don't think he has the cardio to hang around for 5 rounds, but I don't think many people do. So trying to win 3 out of 5 against Merab, if your name is not Umar Nurmagomedov, that might be tough. So I think if you're trying to find someone to beat Merab, you're kind of just hoping they could get an early, knockout on him. We saw him get hurt in the Cejudo fight. We saw him get hurt in the Marlon Moraes fight early on. You can catch him early, and I think of all the dudes at bantamweight, Figgy might have the best opportunity to catch him early, just based on his power and the fact that he does, could lock up a submission. And then my number 3 was kind of a tough call. I debated between a few different guys. I considered putting Jose Aldo on here just because of the takedown defense, but even if he's not fighting at altitude, I just don't know if he has the finishing upside, where even if Merab isn't getting him down, he's just going to hold him there in the clinch, and Aldo really hasn't shown the urgency to get out of those positions in some of his recent fights. So I ended up going with Petr Yan, and it's tough, right? Because the first fight was not competitive at all. I just think Petr Yan is too good to have that happen to him again. 50 takedown attempts, 11 landed, 7 minutes of control time. He actually did a pretty good job of, defending the takedowns, but also not getting held down in that matchup. I just have to believe that if these two were to fight again, Petr Yan is going to have better answers to the wrestling. I think he's going to have to throw some things to kind of discourage the consistent shots, whether those are uppercuts, knees, whatever it may be. But I do think Petr Yan would fare better in a rematch. Not saying he would win, but I think he would, have a better showing for himself. And then the final weight class here, Alexandre Pantoja, someone who's, pretty much cleared out this weight class. I'm going to say his toughest test is Brandon Moreno. We saw them fight for the title. He did take it off of Moreno, but it was a close fight. It was a split decision. Moreno looked really good in his last fight against Amir Albazi. I think if these two fight, it's always going to be competitive. Not saying Pantoja would lose to him, and I think what would be the 4th fight, but Moreno's going to at least keep it close. It's going to be competitive. Could he get the win in a decision? Sure. Number 2, going to go with Steve Erceg. I think Steve Erceg looked great in their first title match. He was kind of vaulted up. Wasn't a super highly ranked guy, but got the opportunity because there was no one else. And it was a 2-2 fight heading into the 4th round. Pantoja sealed it in the 5th with 3 minutes of control time, but Steve Erceg was right there, right? 5th round plays out a little bit differently. He could be the champion right now. I know he just got knocked out by Kai Kara France, but this is just for the Pantoja matchup. He did a good job of dealing with his aggressiveness, used some counter elbows well, which is something we saw Figgy do when he beat Pantoja. So even though he's coming off the knockout loss, I still think he looked great and would be a tough matchup for Pantoja. And the number 3, I went with Manel Kape. These two actually fought in 2021. It's kind of crazy because you watch that fight and you don't really recognize either of them. Both guys are just so different today. First off, Pantoja only shot 1 takedown in that fight. I think if these two were to fight again, he's going to be shooting a whole lot more than that. And then Manel Kape, someone who looked super aggressive in his previous fight, was extremely passive in that matchup. So it was kind of a boring decision. Pantoja got it done. Kape has been a capable defensive grappler. He's dangerous on the feet. Had a great showing against Bruno Silva. I will say the loss to Makhachev isn't great because if you want to compare Pantoja's style to someone, it probably would be Makhachev just in terms of the relentless grappling, but Makhachev is less dangerous. I think he's also less dangerous on the feet. So it's not great that Manel Kape lost to that version, but could still be getting better. Top 3 challenge, I think, is fair. But that is going to wrap it up here. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree that these are the toughest matchups for the champions? Let me hear it down below. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.